What is going on, guys? Matt O'Leary here with another video. Today what I want to get into is wide receiver options for the New York Jets after Corey Davis retired. That was some pretty shocking news yesterday out of New York Jets camp that Corey Davis has decided to hang him up at 28 years old. Obviously wishing him the best. He's going to spend some time with his family, and I hope that it's something that makes him happy, and that's something that he is looking forward to. For the New York Jets now, they have to pivot, in my opinion. I don't think they are good enough as is with their current wide receiver core being up top. Obviously, you have Garrett Wilson, Allen Lazard, Randall Cobb, and Mecole Hardman as your top four. Theoretically, yes, you could then keep Jason Brownlee and Xavier Gibson, but I think you need a little bit more pop in that wide receiver core. I'm not even saying that you definitely need, you'll see in a second, my list is, I have a tier 1 trades, I have tier 2 trades, and then I have potential cut candidates who the Jets could then target. So there's different tiers to this. I'm not even saying, like, for instance, Devonte Adams is going to be high on everyone's list. It doesn't have to be a Devonte Adams, but I think they need someone who could plug in as a number 2, 3 option because it falls off quickly. So after Davis retired, according to Over the Cap, the New York Jets have $19.5 million in cap space. They could absolutely acquire a big wide receiver if that's what they wish to do with that money. There's also a slight problem with trades. So when you're going through this with trades, they have a slight issue because of the Aaron Rodgers trade. The Jets have a conditional pick going back to the Packers in the NFL draft. It's either going to be a first or a second round pick. So that is kind of locked up in that deal as is, unless they just took the conditions out and was like, hey, like, it's going to be a first round pick. I'm sure the Packers would be absolutely fine with that. And at this point, I think the Jets have to be fine with that too. Because I just think that's what makes too much sense for this team to do. If they are looking to acquire a big wide receiver, they could then use that second round pick that they have in order to land one of those guys. I don't necessarily think it would take a first round pick on most of these guys, but that number 2 might come in handy unless they wanted to do a third round pick that's conditional that turns into a second round pick if the Jets trade to the Packers becomes a first round pick. Like, there's a lot of layers to this. There's a lot of ways that you can get it done, but just something to keep in mind that the Jets do technically have that hanging over their head with the Aaron Rodgers trade, that it's a first or a second. And that's not me saying that it was a mistake to do that trade or anything like that. It's, look, I was fully comfortable with giving up a first round pick in 2024 for Aaron Rodgers. That's A-okay in my book. Okay, we will start with trade candidates because that's going to be the most fun. And tier 1 is where we will start. I'm going to group these first 2 guys together because they're from the same team. So I'm not necessarily saying that they are ahead of someone else in tier 3. I just wanted to talk about these 2 guys first because they're on the same team. And that's Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. So when I look at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they, after losing Tom Brady, having Todd Bowles as their head coach, and starting Baker Mayfield, they are going to absolutely be in the mix for one of these young quarterbacks, whether it's Caleb Williams, Drake May, whoever, wherever they end up. I think they are definitely going to be a team who is picking somewhere in the top 5 of the NFL draft. They don't really have a future for, they don't have a competitive chance in 2023. They are building for the future. I think it really doesn't make sense to hold on to these expensive vets. Maybe you choose one of them and say, okay, we're gonna be comfortable. One, we're gonna give Baker / Kyle Trask this guy as his weapon, and then our next quarterback, whoever that may be, can have someone solid. And it makes sense to keep Chris Godwin, because he's a little bit younger. He's 3 years younger than Mike Evans. But let's talk Mike Evans first because that's my preferred option. I really like Mike Evans. I think he'd be a great fit. He has a $13 million base salary this year. Last season had 1,100 yards and 6 receiving touchdowns. He has hit 1,000 yards in his career every single year he's been in the league, 9 years in a row. He's been in the league. He's had 1,000. He's been an 1,000-yard receiver. He is the model of consistency in the NFL. One of the most underrated wide receivers in the NFL. It's like clockwork. He's gonna wake up and give you 1,100 yards and 8 touchdowns. Like that's what Mike Evans is. He's really, really good. He fits the outside receiver mold too. So if you want that direct replacement for Corey Davis at 6'5", 231, he's that big outside receiver. He is 30 years old. It's the last year of his deal. But this, in a time where you're going all in, putting your chips to the table, a guy like Mike Evans absolutely makes sense. Whether you could do this trade now, which would be my preference, or at the deadline, because some of these trades might make a little bit more sense at the trade deadline. I prefer to get something done now and not have to wait a few months, but Mike Evans is something that I think would make a ton of sense for this team. Chris Godwin, 27 years old. He has a $1 million base this year. Next year, 18.5. So it goes way, way up after that. I don't love the contract, although the Jets, as they've shown this past offseason, can do some magic with these contracts. He had 1,000 yards and 3 touchdowns last year. He spends a ton of time in the slot, so the Jets would have to change things up a little bit with their offense if they wanted to bring in a Godwin or someone else who's a slot receiver. They really like to have Garrett Wilson in the slot last year, but I guess you would have to have Garrett on the outside, Allen Lazard on the outside, and then it would be Godwin in the slot in this instance, which you could do a lot worse. You could do a hell of a lot worse than that, and I'm sure Garrett Wilson showed that he could play on the outside. I think the Jets just like to move their guys around, and Godwin's pretty much played a large chunk of his career in the slot. I don't know if he's someone that you could really bounce around a whole lot, but at his age, at his price point, all this stuff, and when looking for wide receivers who could potentially be available, Godwin has to be on this list. How could we do a trade list without Devonte Adams? Yes, he is 30 years old now. He is with the Vegas Raiders, but has the obvious Aaron Rodgers connection. And Rodgers loves the guy. Loves the guy. He would love for him to, be here with the New York Jets, I would imagine. He spent a ton of time in Green Bay with him. He's got a big contract, though. He's signed through 2026. The numbers get crazy in 2025 and 2026, so this would absolutely have to be restructured. But this year, $6 million and then $16.9 million base salary over the next couple of years. He had 1,500 yards and 14 touchdowns last year. He's put up double-digit touchdowns in 6 of the last 7 years. The guy's an absolute animal. He is unbelievable. He is just so good. Even at his age, he's one of the best wide receivers in the NFL still. This would be the cream of the crop kind of move. I would love Devonte Adams on this team. I don't know how likely it is that they'd be able to acquire him. But man, that would be so cool. Okay, next up, I have 2 guys in my tier 2 for trades. And first is, a teammate of Devonte Adams, Hunter Renfrow, 27 years old. There was trade rumors in the offseason with Hunter Renfrow. He's battling a shoulder injury right now, so this is not one of my favorite or preferred options, but is in this tier 2 and is, I think, something that's maybe worth exploring. He's pretty much exclusively a slot receiver at his size. He's a very, very good route runner. He wins over the middle of the field a lot, which Corey Davis, while he's a bigger receiver, that's what he did. He won over the middle of the field. He wasn't like this big, deep outside threat. He had a down year last year with just 330 yards and 2 touchdowns, but the year prior had 1,000 yards and 9 touchdowns. Before that was putting up 600 yards a season. He has a $6.5 million base salary this year, $11 million base salary next year. Again, would have to just pretty much put him in the slot and let him do his thing, but you could do a lot worse than Hunter Renfrow. He would probably be the Jets' slide into that second or third spot, which is where Corey Davis likely would have been. So I'm not all the way out on Hunter Renfrow. I think it would be interesting. Is he my preferred option? No, but if he's healthy, improves he's healthy, he would be more affordable than any of the guys higher up on this list, and could be an interesting piece that has team control for 2 years. This next one's a little outside of the box, so bear with me. I don't know if this one's super likely, but we'll talk through it. And that's Robert Woods. He was just signed by the Texans this past offseason. So that's why I'm would they really just sign him to then flip him in a trade? But hear me out. He's 31 years old. He signed with Houston this offseason on a relatively cheap 2-year deal. My question is, would they take a day 3 pick in return for Robert Woods because of all the assets that they gave up to move back up in the draft for Will Anderson. Would they do that? It's interesting. I think you would have to consider, like, would they take a day 3 pick and maybe a Malik Taylor, Jason Brownlee, Xavier Gibson kind of guy? Like, I don't know. I think would be worth exploring for them because they are not in contention this year. So what does a veteran receiver really do for them when they could have someone young and possibly develop? Last year was still pretty solid with the Titans and just a terrible passing offense. Ryan Tannehill stunk last year. He only played 12 games, so he had 5 games of backups, and he still put up 500 yards, 527 with the Titans last season. Okay, my final 2 guys that are going to come in on this list are potential cut candidates, and what I mean by that is players on other teams who could be cut. It's not a guarantee that they're going to be cut, so like it's not like this is me choosing from the free agent crop. I went through and tried to project with rosters on potential guys who could end up getting cut. And you might be asking, well, why no free agent wide receivers who are available that you don't have to give up anything or don't have to worry about if they're going to be cut or not? Because the crop stinks. That is really, really bad. Kenny Golladay is one of the bigger names in there who's been a disaster with the New York Giants, and most people I don't think want to touch with a 10-foot pole. People say Bryan Edwards. No, thank you. Yes, he was a 3rd-round pick, I believe, in the 2021 class. No, 2020. I think it was the Denzel Mims class. But I just don't. I don't know. Doesn't really interest me at all. I think you need to take a higher swing than one of those 2 guys, a higher potential swing than someone like that. So we'll start it with Demarcus Robinson, who is 28 years old. He's with the Rams right now. He's spent a ton of time with the Kansas City Chiefs, put up some decent numbers with Patrick Mahomes. Last year, 458 yards and 2 touchdowns. He's someone who's going to give you probably in that range, like the 400 to 500 yards. And he's still pretty young at 28. Is he a great option? No, it's not a great option, but why the Rams might cut him is they have some younger guys on that roster, and I don't know if Demarcus Robinson's going to be in their top 4 receivers. So if the Jets signed him, could he be someone who goes right in the middle of the pack? He would probably fit in as like a 3rd or 4th receiver. Again, is it my preferred option? No, we've got to get outside the box here a little bit and maybe take a flyer on someone who gets cut. And Demarcus Robinson's one of the more intriguing names who could get cut. The last guy on my list is a Philadelphia Eagle. So anytime an Eagle could be possibly available, I'm going to mention it because of Joe Douglas's relationship with the Philadelphia Eagles. And that's Quez Watkins, who is 25 years old. So last year, 354 yards receiving, but the year prior had 647 yards. He was kind of the Eagles' like 3rd option in the passing attack and then kind of fell out of favor as the year went on. But at his age and with his production from just a couple of years ago, that might be something that I would keep a close eye on as, someone who could come in and be a number 3 option behind Wilson and Lazard. And that's probably where Corey Davis was going to end up, somewhere in that range. With his age, I think he has a potentially higher upside than someone like a Demarcus Robinson. But there is some risk involved there. I don't know if this is the exact kind of fit that the New York Jets could use, but again, I think worthwhile to at least bring up when looking at wide receiver options. So there you go. I listed off a bunch of different options for you, but you let me know from my list who you like the best from my list. Did I leave someone off? Who would you look to acquire? Do the Jets need to acquire someone? Let me know in the comments. Once again, I'm Matt O'Leary, and I'll catch you next time.